Actually not. They were dodging us. Oh, look at this. We got some guests, huh? Oh, I hope we have some good questions prepared.
Look at, they got their notepads and everything.
Man, look at that. Is this a paid apprenticeship? Is that right? Fair enough. Yeah, you know what? It's a good compensation. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our lovely guest this morning. It is a pleasure to be here. End of week 10, which is often the hardest week of the session, as we are in crossover week, and so Monday will be the final sprint to get all of our Senate bills over on time, and I know the House is doing the same. Before I jump into some of the more interesting details, I have to say today I was this year's old when I learned that one of our members, and I will keep it a secret till now, in honor of the late Chuck Norris, who passed away, one of our members sparred in karate against him in tournaments in the 70s. I'm not going to say who. Maybe we'll see. Maybe there'll be a reveal later. But one of those things you learn about your colleagues that you just think like, man, this is a pretty special place. So we'll see if that gets revealed later today. Let's see, what else happened today? This week was a big one. We passed our budget, which was a really big deal for us. Of course, the House is dealing with the energy package, and we'll swap so that they take up the budget next week, and we will take up the energy package next week. We had bipartisan votes on both the budget and the BRFA. And what we know and what we've said from the very beginning is that this year's budget invests in the things that matter the most to Marylanders: growth, affordability, and protecting Maryland against the harmful effects of the federal administration. This year, the budget is $70.7 billion, $10.2 billion for public schools. This is a historic investment, including nearly $500 million for new school construction. The Senate budget also includes $4.6 billion for Medicaid to provide health care to 1.4 million Marylanders, including 197,000 children. Understanding the immense strain that Marylanders are feeling in their monthly expenses, the budget also includes $100 million in relief for electric customers, which, when coupled with proposed policy changes, will save Maryland families at least $150 on their annual energy bills. In addition, there's $280 million for the Office of Home Energy Programs to assist low-income households with their energy bills and arrearages. We know that residents are counting on us to reduce their costs, and this budget does just that. As you've also all witnessed, this week has included debates on a variety of other important issues that we've taken up. The Senate has been highly productive, especially this week. We've passed 116 bills, and we have another 30 considering final legislation over the next week. As I said, Monday is crossover day, and we'll move through a tranche of legislation to send final Senate bills to their House committees, and hopefully we'll get there by sine die. We've moved the energy package we will take up the energy package next week, as I already mentioned. I do want to make sure that I highlight that the overarching goal of our energy package is to maximize savings for the people of Maryland. We must reduce costs as much as is practically and politically feasible. At the same time, we're going to remain focused on the medium and long-term approach of stabilizing our energy market through new, cleaner, in-state generation and responsible investment in transmission to ensure reliability. As the chairs come up to give their remarks, you'll hear about other critical legislation that we're dealing with in the Senate as we seek to protect and invest in Marylanders. I want to turn it over in just a moment to Chair Beidel, but want to thank each of the chairs and each of the members for the hard work that they've put in these last 2 weeks. It has been an intense period, but it's what Marylanders expect of us as we have to deliver in this time of need. With that, let me hand it over to our chair of the Finance Committee, Chair Pam Beidel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all for being here. So as we started the year, I talked about the wide range of variety of issues that the Finance Committee does. Fortunately, we don't do the budget. A lot of people still confuse us that we do the budget. But this year we handled bills on health care, vaccines, health insurance, hospital issues, disability, community needs, business regulation, including banking, staking, virtual currency, and insurance, and workman's compensation, cannabis, liquor laws, and transportation issues. So it was quite a session for Finance Committee with over 300 bills. We will pass the governor's transit-oriented development bill, and we're still working on dynamic pricing, but I believe it will pass out of the committee today. Both bills have required significant amendments and input from stakeholders. They've been really pretty complicated bills. The Senate Finance Committee was pleased to resolve an issue that's plagued our firefighters for years. They will receive disablement for hypertension if they have taken medication for 90 days. They no longer are required to miss work. And we also passed the bill to provide overtime for our firefighters if they work more than 42 hours a week. We passed a bill to ensure women receive care they need when they arrive at a hospital with a pregnancy-related emergency. And we also passed bills addressing education about menopause, perimenopause, and postmenopause. We passed a bill requiring that certain health insurance provide coverage for scalp cooling because of hair loss due to chemotherapy. So we've done really a lot of healthcare issues to help our constituents with the issues they struggle with. 2 years ago, we passed the bill so everybody could move, and it was about prosthesis. This year, we continued that work with orthosis, that orthosis needs to be replaced or repaired as needed. And big bill from the ATCC enforcement for seizures of unauthorized consumable products. We have tobacconist stores all over the state selling electronic smoking devices, and there's been no enforcement. And so now with the bill that we passed, there'll be enforcement for those products, as well as sale and advertisement for kratom and phenibut to individuals under the age of 21. An important bill that requires the licenses to sell the ESD devices is really going to help ATCC in their ability to enforce. We passed a bill concerning advertising for cannabis in retail stores, updating current regulations. And then we updated enforcement inspections for crematories, which, if you remember a few years ago, there were some real controversies about crematories. So we've done really a big change on who will oversee crematories. And then we passed collective bargaining for adjunct faculty at certain state universities and arbitration for state employees. We're still working on a bill about premium cigar lounges serving alcohol. Every single committee meeting, it seems like we spend at least a half an hour on that bill, and I'm hoping today we're going to get that out of committee. So we've had a lot of good bills, but some that we couldn't pass because of the fiscal notes, and I appreciate all your attention. Thank you, and it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Will Smith. Nope. Senator Ben Brooks, thank you.
Good morning. Yeah, as the chair of the Senate Executive Nominations Committee, I'm proud to highlight the important work we've undertaken this session. The committee plays a critical role in ensuring that the individuals appointed to serve in key positions in the government are qualified, capable, and prepared to serve the people with integrity. Our responsibility is not just procedural, it's grounded in accountability, transparency, and maintaining the public trust in government. All right, throughout this session, the committee has carefully reviewed, evaluated, and confirmed 6 cabinet secretaries, each of whom now leads a major state agency that directly impacts the daily lives of Marylanders. These agencies support our veterans and military families, promote public safety, and manage our transportation system, oversees the state budget and operations, and drive innovation in government services. In addition, we evaluated and acted on numerous nominations to the boards, commissions, and our critical roles across the state government. We are also fulfill our constitutional responsibility to review and confirm members of the judiciary, helping to ensure that our courts are led by individuals who demonstrate fairness, sound judgment, and a strong commitment to the rule of law. Each nominee receives thoughtful and thorough consideration. We closely examine their qualifications, ask substantive questions, and assess their readiness to meet the responsibilities entrusted to them. This important work is more than a nomination. It's about setting clear expectations. Leadership in public service requires not only expertise, but also accountability, responsiveness, and a commitment to ethical governance. As we move forward, the committee remains committed to conducting its work with fairness, diligence, and transparency. We recognize that these decisions carry lasting impacts, and we, and we take these responsibilities seriously. I want to thank my colleagues on the committee for their dedication, as well as the staff who support this important work behind the scene. Together, we're helping to ensure that our state government is led by individuals who are prepared to meet the challenge ahead and to serve our communities effectively. Thank you, and I thank you for your attention. I thank you for being here this morning.
Yeah, we'll have Chair Will Smith join us. Fresh from voting.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I see two really, really smart, good-looking reporters here. Yeah, that's good. I always said it's good they look like their mother, eh? But anyway, good morning, everyone. Senator Smith just came back from voting. The Judicial Proceedings Committee has been focused on three core lines of effort as we head into crossover, as we head into the finish of crossover. One is pushing back against the Trump administration's unlawful immigration enforcement. Two is implementing public safety and justice reform. And then three, ensuring that housing justice in Maryland, balancing people's access to housing with also our dire need to create more housing. Earlier this year, this session, we passed a ban on 287G agreements, which is now in the House. The Senate version is the House. I think we are in receipt of the House version as well. We also passed Senator Augustine's unmasking ICE bill, which prohibits ICE and all federal agents from wearing, and state and local agents from wearing masks with certain exceptions, and also requiring them to have proper identification as they operate within the confines of our state. We've also we also passed the No Kings Act, which is the Vice Chair Wallstreicher's bill, which passed third reader yesterday, which will allow us in Maryland, Maryland citizens, to hold federal law enforcement officers who violate your constitutional rights accountable in state courts, which is the Converse 1983, Section 42 U.S.C. 1983, which allows for, currently allows for Maryland residents to hold federal or state and local law enforcement officers accountable in federal court. We also we're going to, it's probably being discussed right now upstairs in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, pass a piece of legislation that I've sponsored to get rid of all private detention centers in Maryland. That's inclusive of immigration and detention centers, but all private detention centers in Maryland. We believe that a broad applicability will withstand constitutional muster, and also it's good policy for us not to have private detention centers in Maryland. So finally getting rid of that. Earlier this year, we also passed a piece of legislation that greatly curtails the practice of automatically charging youth as adults. And we know about the racial disparities, but also the waste of resources. I believe that that's going to be actually, I think that's a public safety bill, because you're going to get better public safety outcomes getting those youth services in a more quick fashion, as opposed to having them languish in adult prisons for up to 2 years, 3 years without education, without services. We've also moved legislation to help ensure that residents across Maryland have access to things like air conditioning units. We've also moved to improve access to quality housing by, we just passed this bill just 20 minutes ago to allow for second chance citizens to have access to housing across the state of Maryland by shielding certain offenses that can be considered when you're offering a lease to a tenant. So we've done things to ensure that second chance citizens have access to housing. We've protected our vulnerable residents by ensuring that air conditioning is there. We've also balanced that with the need to create new housing across the state of Maryland. We're experiencing out-migration in Maryland, and the greatest driver of that out-migration for population from early 20s to mid-40s is affordability and housing affordability. And that's because we have a lack of affordable housing. So we want to make sure that we balance protections for the vulnerable with not creating an over-regulated environment that's non-permissive for the entry of new people wanting to build affordable housing at decent rates. So with that, the Judicial Proceedings Committee has been very busy, focused on public safety, youth justice, fighting against the illegal and unconstitutional immigration reforms, and then making sure that every Marylander has a safe and clean place to live.
Okay. Okay, well, good to be here. Hello, young men. Very good. Okay, Tripoli, another strong session with a lot of action still ahead of us. I will say most notably, we're going to be dealing with the 122-page bill that is in our possession on energy policy next week. But we've heard about 290 Senate bills. The House bills are starting to come over. We'll begin hearing those next week. I like to remind how broad the jurisdiction of the committee is. Again, I think this year, again, we'll have, I think, more bills than any other committee in the General Assembly. It's not just education, blueprint, higher education, it's energy, it's environment, AI, cybersecurity, data centers, affordable housing, which was touched on by Senator Smith. We had some of that, election law, a lot of action there. Senate President talked about the energy package. Last week, we did a press conference with the governor and the House leadership. We rolled out a piece of legislation that we just referenced, the Utility Relief Act. Very, very broad, very, very broad. As the Senate President mentioned, we're talking about short-term relief, medium and long-term. That did pass out of the House with a bipartisan vote. It's now in the Senate, so where Tripoli will send back the Senate product on that framework, and then we'll obviously have time to work out the differences. On the housing front, Chair Smith did mention that affordability crisis, which has, as he mentioned, prompted a lot of our residents, particularly younger individuals and middle-income families, have been leaving the state, and so. I think I've identified about 100,000 unit short in terms of the demand and growth projections for our state, a major problem. So I want to highlight two bills that we did pass out of the committee, specifically dealing with residential development projects in Maryland and streamlining that process. The Maryland Housing Certainty Act from Senator Augustine to my left, Senate Bill 325, provides the kind of regulatory certainty in the approval process we absolutely need in this state, and ultimately contributes to a reduction in the cost of housing units. Another bill from Senator Brooks, also to my left, Senate Bill 267, the Building Affordability in My Backyard Act, which authorizes local jurisdictions to establish an administrative process to review, approve, modify, or deny housing development project applications. On the education front, just on the floor, I think we're on third reader, revisions to Maryland's blueprint, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, Senate Bill 311, which continues to refine the blueprint as we move into year 4 of its implementation. The changes reflect a number of recommendations from a variety of stakeholders with an eye towards simplifying implementation while still moving forward with the goals laid out in the blueprint. Another bill that's on third reader in the Senate right now has to do with cell phones in schools, the Maryland Phone-Free Schools Act. Senate Bill 928 from Senator Harris requires every local board of education develop and implement a policy that will prohibit the use of cell phones in schools by the 2027 school year. A lot of other education, a bunch of environmental policy bills on everything from PFAS to a number of other issues. And one final thing on the election law front, we did pass for the third straight year a piece of legislation sponsored by Senator Kagan, Senate Bill 5, would make a constitutional change on how we fill legislative vacancies. Again, third straight year out of the Senate. I'm hoping that the House will finally push it over the finish line. And with that, I will turn it to Senator Craig Zucker. Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Smith, I heard what you said earlier about the two wonderful reporters in the front. Brian Sears, I want to let you know I brought my youngest today, and he too benefits looking more like his mother than me. Well, good morning, everybody. As you heard, the Senate of Maryland has been focused on lowering costs while growing the economy. Today, under the great leadership of Chair Gazzoni, the Capital Budget Subcommittee will be reporting out to the full committee, and next week, the Senate will be taking up the capital budget of the state of Maryland that focuses on 3 core areas: infrastructure, reliability, and jobs. The capital budget is the largest infrastructure and job creation bill of this session, and will invest billions of dollars in our schools, hospital, critical infrastructure projects, and cultural institutions. This $6 billion economic investment will ultimately create thousands of direct and indirect jobs and generate billions in economic activity. Some notable projects include funding for hospitals, health facility expansions, and schools in counties across the entire state, from the Eastern Shore to Frederick. We are also investing close to $1 billion toward economic growth, neighborhood revitalization, and access to affordable housing. The capital budget will in fact reflect a One Maryland approach where we will have invested and supported every jurisdiction in the state. So, as we prepare next week to pass the capital budget, we are focused on good infrastructure, good jobs, secure future. Happy to take any questions.
Hey, Mr. President, can I make one correction? Okay, I made a statement that I thought Tripoli was going to, again, have more bills than any other committee in the General Assembly. I think that's premature because the Senate Finance Committee and us have been neck and neck, and I want to give credit to all the work of the Finance Committee, so I want to stand back and just make that subtle edit to my comments.
You see this incredibly collaborative and unified leadership team. This is the Senate of Maryland's all about. So thank you all. Thank you for being here. Questions that folks may have. And Senator Smith had to run back up. They're going to finish voting before we go to the floor. So. Yep.
President, I wanted to ask, as we're starting to wrap up the legislative session, one of the things that DLS had recommended early on in the budget discussions was the state looking forward at setting up a fund to deal with the potential for natural disasters, given the fact that the federal government is stepping down a little bit. And I wanted to get a sense of where you think we are now as we're getting ready to leave session, and what is the work that remains to be done to put Maryland on a little bit more of a solid footing if they have to step in and handle more of this themselves?
Well, what I'd say is that I'm really proud of the work that the Senate Budget and Tax Committee did, in particular by leaving a substantial cash balance. We do believe that we know that the federal government is less reliable than it's ever been, particularly when it comes to emergency management. This is something that we always used to be able to rely on the federal government. When there was a disaster, we go to FEMA. We've seen over the last year and a half that is an assumption that is now fully tested, and we have no idea on any given emergency whether the federal government will come through. It is one of the reasons why we left a greater cash balance, was to have flexible dollars for emergencies and for whatever other unpredictable things might come from this administration. And so we did make substantial cuts in order to have that cash balance available.
The amount that DLS recommended earlier this year is actually I think it was around $20 million.
No, I think it was 24, right?
It's less than the $33 million in damages that were suffered and asked for by Western Maryland and FEMA. Is $20 million going to be enough in that sort of an account, given the costs that we're seeing now?
Well, the Senate's budget leaves a cash balance of $250 million, and so I think that's an important factor. Whether it is siphoned into a specific fund for emergencies is an open policy question that we have to work through. We've also pushed the administration to look for other solutions, kind of catastrophic insurance policies that the state could take out for certain unforeseen events. Which I know a number of other states are looking into compacts to see if that might be viable to fill in the gap that the federal government has provided or created. So we want to have plenty of options in the case of emergency. I think our budget does sufficiently prepare for that. And we're going to have to figure out what we're doing moving forward, because we know in emergencies, a single state often can't handle it alone.
Mr. President, why not offer a gas tax holiday?
Look, I think it's as tempting as ever, as for anyone in this period of high cost, to say, of course, let's just roll back all taxes. The reality is, people still have to drive to work. They still have to use the bridges. They still have to use transit systems to get to and from cultural events, to work, to school, you name it. And we have to provide that infrastructure in order for our economy to function. And so the gas tax is about a quarter of all revenue that comes in for transportation projects. It is in a specialized locked fund that can only be used for transportation purposes. And so I'm feeling the frustration of a arbitrarily created war that has now driven up energy prices across the globe. Without a clear mission about what the plan is, what was going to be the preparations for increased costs. This is a direct product of a federal government and a Trump administration that does not think before they act, and we are dealing with those consequences. And so in the meantime, while all of us are dealing with these higher costs, we in the state of Maryland, we still have to fund a transportation system. And so to do a gas tax holiday would severely jeopardize the underpinning and infrastructure of our economy that relies on those investments.
But just as a follow-up, I mean, it happened before and there were no serious consequences that we're aware of.
You know, when we did it before in a prior time, it was when there was significant federal money that was available and flexible as a result of the COVID pandemic. There was just a greater deal of flexibility in the system. Right now, we are maximizing every dollar that's in state government, and you know, it's one of these things that you can make a short-term decision that feels good in the moment, but leads to long-term serious problems. And that's what I think ultimately this gas tax holiday would look like. And in fact, it's what the Republicans argued when we did it the first time, was that this is a short-term measure that doesn't solve a long-term issue. And I think we experienced that it was a little bit of relief, but it didn't sufficiently deal with the pressures that Marylanders were facing.
Mr. President, I know Chair Smith had to step away, but CASA's here lobbying for a couple of other immigration-related bills like the Community Trust Act, data privacy. They appear to be moving a little bit quicker in the House than in the Senate. I was just curious if you could speak to any of those, if they remain Senate priorities for the rest of the session.
Yeah, I mean, these are all responding to the way that the Trump administration has unlawfully approached immigration enforcement is something that is an absolute priority. It's why it's some of the first work that we did. We'd like to see the House move on the masking bill. We think that that's a really important one. We're working on the detention bill. I think that the chair had to go back up because they're working on these issues in particular. When it comes to health and safety of those who have been indiscriminately picked up off of streets without due process, we want to have tools to make sure that when they are detained in the state of Maryland, it is done in a way that is safe and in compliance with health laws. And so these are remaining a priority, and we'll move through in the next 3 weeks to get them done.
Follow-up. I know you guys have already done what you needed to do with youth auto charging, but I'm just curious, are you privy to any of the conversations with the House and if they seem favorable to your version or how that's going?
We're waiting to see. My sense is that they probably are going to land in the same spot, and we're hopeful they do.
Mr. President, what would you say to critics of the raft of immigration bills that are still moving through the General Assembly, that this is Democrats politically signaling to their base during an election year?
I would say that what we are doing is responding to the threats that are being forced upon our community by the Trump administration. We are seeing un-American activities at the federal level that are redefining who we are as Americans. And so we are responding to this moment where we believe that this approach to federal immigration enforcement is absolutely antithetical to American values. And so in Maryland, we are building the protections in place to make sure that we are protecting all of our neighbors and all of our residents from an indiscriminate approach to enforcement.
On energy, are there any differences that the House and Senate are having right now, or areas where you expect there to be differences? I've heard a lot of buzz too about the power cuts.
I think there will be slight differences. The framework is in full agreement. We've had lots of conversations. It's complicated. We have a lot of pieces of this package. And so there are going to be places where the two bills likely have a little bit of differences that we'll work through in a conference committee. But I would say on the whole, we are committed to the fundamental goal of making sure that there is at least $150 of annual savings for your everyday Marylanders and hundreds of millions of dollars more for low-income Marylanders who are facing unprecedented bills, and investments to have cleaner in-state generated energy moving forward.
Inspectors General across the state say that current MPIA restrictions are hindering their abilities to do their investigations, and the current bill in the Senate to ensure that they are exempt from the MPIA is still stuck in rules. Why is that, and do you see it actually dying this year?
We're still working on this issue. We want to make sure that we get this one right. I think a full exemption of MPIA is probably an unlikely result here. I think that when we have conversations about what is the appropriate role of an inspector general, I think there is some information that should be readily accessible without asking. There should be some information that's accessible with upon request and that is redacted for particularly sensitive information. And then there's likely some information that is available through subpoena. And the reason is that government handles information from citizens that is extremely, extremely sensitive. And we have to be incredibly thoughtful about how the public's data is accessed and viewed and made accessible. And so working through to make sure that we have real data privacy protections for individuals in Maryland is a core value that has to be leading this conversation about what information gets shared back and forth with an inspector general or not. And I feel confident that we'll get through this. We have had in the state of Maryland, the Department of Legislative Services has had an audits division and now a performance evaluation team. we have the same level of restrictions. We have requests of executive agencies, and we've been able to do significant work. We have a number of bills coming out of our Joint Audits Committee that are fixing programs that were identified through audits or through performance evaluations. That's how government functions. This kind of proxy fight about whether or not certain data is available is not actually doing the work. We know that fixing problems is what should lead the day, and sort of a proxy fight about data is a distraction.
But these IGs say that they've had this information for years and this has never been an issue until recently. So I guess, why is this suddenly a problem? And if the information access is the concern, I mean, in Baltimore City, we saw a data breach with juvenile records, and the city is now asking more agencies to have access to this information. Is that a concern?
I mean, absolutely. I think that's exactly a great example of what we're trying to make sure that we're protecting against. Personal information, health data.
That hasn't happened with IGs.
Say that again?
The data breach didn't happen with the IG.
That's fine. It's still individuals' data has to be protected. And we have a responsibility as policymakers to protect individuals' data for whomever may access it. So be it in IGs or other agencies, we have to have clear systems in place because we know the threats that are out there, that we've seen global threats of accessing individuals' data and using it for harmful purposes. We have to be really thoughtful about individual data and the systems that make it open or not.
We can do one or two more, guys. Does anybody else besides Christine, real quick? Hold on.
Can someone explain what's happened to the dynamic pricing bill? How much is that bill needed? It's a lot of the testimony during the hearing got to that it's not a widespread practice, the changing of prices in the grocery store. In the moments that we're concerned about.
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's very important to our constituents. It was like their third priority and things that we needed to address. And so, you know, my committee really tries to collaborate with all the stakeholders. And so we've had the retailers in and some of the other technical companies. And we've come to conclusions, and I think we're going to vote it out today. But it's been complicated trying to address everyone's concerns. But it is needed. People feel like, particularly when they're ordering online, and it will affect online food services too, that prices are being, spiked up at busy hours or in demand, and the bill's going to address that. So it's just taken a lot of work and collaboration.
So it's going to be expanded to bring in online retailers, because I don't think it was at first.
It was not all retailers, but online food. Thank you.
We can do one more, guys.
Mr. President, my question was a follow-up on energy, if you don't mind. When you're talking about the gas tax, you talked about something that in the short term may feel good to cut the gas tax, but in the long term could kind of bite you in the butt. Can you talk about why making temporary cuts to the energy efficiency program in Power doesn't feel that way, and it does feel like something that is the proper thing to do in this moment?
Well, I would say we made a shift, right? The governor's bill and the policies that we had last year were temporary, twice a year, $40 bill credits. We don't believe that was maybe as effective as we had hoped, and so we have been looking for programs that can provide a glide path of predictable reductions. And so Empower is the one program that is in every month's bill, and that by making adjustments to that program, we can deliver annual savings month by month by month. And so that was why that policy shift happened, is because we think kind of the one-time quick hits don't really provide that certainty and predictability for Marylanders, and adjustments to Empower are the right place. Do you want to add anything?
As the Senate President said, we don't have like huge numbers of tools in the toolbox in terms of the short term. The Power program is on everybody's bill. The one other thing I'd say is it has been a hugely successful program when it was created back in 2008 until about 2023, 2022, but the return on investment is sliding because a lot of the low-hanging fruit from that program, so to speak, was achieved early on. And so when you look at sort of how Empower operates now relative to that first 15 years, it's not quite, that's why there's been a lot of debate about reforms to Empower, because again, the light bulbs and all the things that were kind of in the front end of the program were very, very successful in terms of energy efficiency and like. Now you're talking about much bigger kinds of equipment and appliance, things that the ROI is not quite as compelling. So I would throw that into the mix as well.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you
guys.
very much.
You guys, how are you doing? Did you have fun?